Hi guys, tonight we're standing beside a cold California stream in 1848 where running water slips around stones beneath tall trees and an ordinary working day is about to disturb an entire continent. The air smells of damp earth, fresh timber, and wood smoke drifting from unfinished buildings nearby. Somewhere above the water, an axe strikes wood with a steady rhythm. Then something bright appears among the gravel. It is small enough to rest on a fingertip, yet powerful enough to redirect ships, families, fortunes, and governments. You do not hear trumpets announcing a new age, you hear water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell us where you are listening from and your local time tonight. Perhaps you are awake while California sleeps, or resting while morning reaches those distant western hills. Now dim the lights. You find yourself in California during January 1848, when the region feels remarkably distant from the crowded eastern cities of the United States. California has only recently passed from Mexican control to American occupation, and the political future still feels unfinished. Roads are rough, settlements scattered, and communication with the Atlantic world can require months. Along the American River, carpenter James Marshall supervises construction of a sawmill for John Sutter. Sutter hopes timber will strengthen his agricultural enterprises around the Sacramento Valley. Neither man expects this practical project to become associated with one of history's most famous migrations. On January 24, Marshall notices bright pieces in the channel below the mill. You crouch beside the water and imagine his uncertainty. The stream chills your fingers almost immediately. Gravel presses against your palm while the current keeps moving, utterly indifferent to human ambition. Marshall suspects the material is gold. Tests soon strengthen that suspicion, and word begins moving through nearby settlements. At first, Sutter and Marshall have good reasons to prefer discretion. Labourers might abandon their duties. Property could become difficult to control, and Sutter's carefully planned agricultural world could dissolve beneath waves of newcomers. That concern proves remarkably accurate. Historical records preserved from early California show that news spreads unevenly during the first months. Some people dismiss the reports, others quietly investigate. Merchants begin noticing unusual demand for mining tools and supplies, while workers disappear toward promising streams. By spring, the secret is barely a secret. Your surroundings begin changing almost before anyone understands what is happening. Farms lose workers. Workshops become quieter. Soldiers desert ordinary routines. Sailors reaching California hear rumors and sometimes abandon ships sitting in the harbor. The transformation feels strangely personal. A cook hears that another man found gold and leaves his kitchen. A clerk closes his ledger. A laborer studies his worn boots and wonders whether one difficult journey might change his family forever. Hope becomes contagious. Research associated with major university collections, including holdings studied by historians at institutions such as Yale and the University of California, supports a basic historical reality. The discovery itself matters enormously, but communication turns that discovery into a global event. Newspapers carry reports eastward, although distance slows everything. Letters describe astonishing possibilities, and stories become larger with every retelling. One successful miner may become 10 successful miners by the time a rumor crosses a crowded room. Then national authority gives the story extraordinary credibility. In December 1848, President James K. Polk confirms the California gold discoveries in his annual message to Congress. The announcement helps transform scattered reports into something Americans across the country can treat as established fact. Now the dream has official weight. You imagine reading the news during a cold eastern winter. California seems almost impossibly remote. Maps show mountains, deserts, and enormous distances between familiar towns and those western valleys. Yet the gold appears to offer something older, Societies rarely promise so openly sudden advancement through individual effort and luck. Of course, the reality is already more complicated. Gold mining requires food, tools, physical endurance, knowledge, and access to productive ground. Successful discoveries attract competitors quickly. Prices rise near mining districts because nearly everyone needs the same boots, blankets, flour, shovels, and transportation. Even before the Great Migration of 1849, the mythology is separating from daily experience. Historians still debate how much the rush should be understood as a story of individual opportunity and how much it represents a larger transformation driven by conquest, migration, commerce, and expanding American power. Scholars working across institutions including Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, and the University of California have approached Western expansion through different economic, environmental, political, and social perspectives. No single perspective makes the landscape simple for the miner standing beside a stream. However, those enormous questions remain distant. Your immediate world is wet boots, aching shoulders, rough food, and the possibility that the next handful of gravel contains something valuable. You hear shovels scraping against stone. Cold water darkens wool trousers around the knees. Smoke from a nearby cooking fire catches in your throat. While someone complains that yesterday's beans have somehow returned for another meal, frontier luxury has modest standards. Still, the mood keeps rising. Men who possessed little property begin imagining farms, businesses, comfortable houses, or freedom from debt. Others dream simply of returning home with enough money to prove the journey worthwhile. Some already possess capital and recognize opportunity on the stream themselves. The goldfields are becoming markets. California's population begins swelling as people arrive from nearby regions before the famous international flood reaches full force. Existing communities suddenly face pressures that few could have predicted during Marshall's quiet January morning. There is excitement here, but unease follows closely behind it. Claims will overlap, supplies will tighten, rivers will fill with workers, indigenous communities will face catastrophic disruption as mining expands across their lands. New arrivals will discover that opportunity is distributed neither equally nor peacefully. For tonight, those consequences remain beyond the next ridge. You stand beside the river, while daylight fades across the foothills, the temperature falls, and your damp clothing becomes uncomfortable against tired skin. Somewhere nearby, a man carefully wraps several bright flakes inside paper. They weigh almost nothing. Yet around those tiny fragments, the future is gathering momentum. Letters are traveling east. Newspapers are printing extraordinary reports. Families are discussing impossible journeys around kitchen tiers. Soon thousands will leave familiar lives behind. They will cross oceans and plains, climb mountains, bury companions, spend savings, and arrive exhausted beneath the California sky. They will come carrying picks, blankets, letters from home, and expectations shaped by rumors. The quiet stream has already done its work, and as 1848 gives way to 1849, you begin moving toward California with them. The rumors that followed you from that California stream now spread across towns, farms, ports, workshops, and newspaper offices throughout 1849. What had seemed distant becomes personal once neighbors begin selling property, gathering supplies, and speaking seriously about traveling west. You watch families unfold paper maps across wooden tables beneath wavering candlelight. California appears impossibly far away, separated from eastern homes by plains, deserts, mountains, oceans, and enormous stretches without familiar roads. Yet distance does little to weaken gold fever. Thousands of people decide that remaining home might be the greater risk. A farmer calculates what his land might bring. A young clerk counts his savings twice. A carpenter studies the tools he can carry without burdening himself unnecessarily. Behind each decision sits an intimate promise. Perhaps one prosperous season will clear a mortgage. Perhaps several fortunate months will provide security for children waiting at home. Perhaps California offers the independence that ordinary wages never seem able to provide. The people remembered as the 49ers are not following one road. They approach California through several major routes, each demanding its own combination of money, endurance, preparation, and luck. For many overland travelers, the journey begins along established migration corridors leading toward the Missouri frontier. Wagons gather near departure points where animals, flour, tools, spare parts, blankets, and weapons compete for limited space. You quickly learn that a wagon is not a travelling house. Every unnecessary object adds weight that animals must pull across thousands of difficult miles. Sentimental possessions are reconsidered. Heavy furniture stays behind. Even useful equipment may eventually be abandoned beside the trail when exhausted animals struggle. Your hands smell of leather and dust as you tighten harness straps before sunrise. Oxen breathe heavily in the cool morning air, and wagon wheels groan before the day's first mile has properly begun. Then the landscape opens. Spring grass stretches beneath an enormous sky while wagon groups follow rivers and existing trails westward. Early days can almost feel pleasant, especially before heat, illness, broken equipment, and fatigue begin collecting their quiet toll. Historical research drawing on emigrant diaries and surviving correspondence, including materials examined by scholars at institutions such as Stanford and the University of California, shows how carefully many travelers planned their departures. Timing mattered because mountain passes could become deadly once winter arrived. That calendar follows you every day. Travel too early, and spring mud can slow wagons while grass remains insufficient for livestock. Leave too late, and snow may close the mountains before California can be reached. So you keep moving. Dust settles into your clothing and hair during dry stretches. Wet weather turns roads into sticky mud that clings heavily around wheels. Your boots remain damp after river crossings, while the smell of wet leather follows you into camp. Meals become repetitive. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, and whatever fresh food can occasionally be obtained shape much of the routine. Nobody has packed a charming picnic for several thousand miles of migration. Your stomach eventually stops demanding variety and begins appreciating quantity. Evening brings another kind of exhaustion. You sit near a small fire while someone repairs a harness under fading light. Another traveller writes a letter home, carefully describing progress, while perhaps softening the harder details for worried relatives. That small act reveals the human distance involved. For many travellers, leaving for California means accepting that communication with home may take months. News of illness, births, deaths, and changing family circumstances travels painfully slowly. The trail creates its own society. Strangers cooperate because river crossings, damaged wagons, lost animals, and illness rarely respect individual plans. Arguments also develop over pace, leadership, grazing supplies, and decisions about dangerous routes. Historians still debate how closely the popular image of the 49ers reflects the full diversity of people who join the rush. Scholars at universities including Yale, Princeton, and Oxford have helped broaden Western history beyond the familiar image of a lone American man walking beside a covered wagon. The migration is far more international. Others reach California by sea, and their journey carries different hardships. Some sail from Atlantic ports around Cape Horn at the southern end of South America, accepting months aboard crowded vessels before reaching San Francisco. You feel the deck shifting beneath tired feet. Sea wind stiffens your clothing with salt, and cramped sleeping quarters grow unpleasant after weeks among strangers. Fresh food becomes limited. Storms disturb sleep, and the horizon sometimes seems determined never to change. A faster possibility involves traveling by ship to Central America, crossing the narrow land between oceans, then finding another vessel toward California. The route can save time, but transportation remains uncertain and disease presents serious danger. Ports become crowded with impatient travelers. People who expected an orderly transfer discover delays, inflated prices, confusing arrangements, and uncomfortable lodging. Gold fever has created a migration faster than transportation systems can comfortably absorb. Then California finally appears. For overland travelers, the mountains deliver one final physical test before the western valleys open below. Frozen fingers grip reins during cold mornings, while tired animals pick through difficult terrain. Relief comes slowly. You have spent months imagining arrival as a clean ending. Instead, California introduces another problem immediately. The goldfields are not waiting beside every road with neat signs and empty claims. San Francisco itself is ranging at astonishing speed. Ships crowd the harbor, businesses multiply, and newcomers search for transportation towards Sacramento and the mining districts. Goods are expensive because demand has exploded faster than reliable supply. You hear dozens of ambitions spoken around you. One man intends to become rich before Christmas. Another promises his family he will return within 2 years. Someone nearby has already decided selling equipment to miners may be wiser than searching for gold himself. That thought lingers. The journey west has taught you something the newspapers rarely emphasize. Gold may reward a fortunate few, but migration itself creates opportunities for teamsters, merchants, builders, cooks, innkeepers, and countless others. Still, you have not traveled this far to sell breakfast. You follow the movement inland, where dusty roads carry wagons, pack animals, tools, and exhausted newcomers toward rivers whose names have become symbols of possibility. The air grows warmer. Your boots are worn from travel, your clothes carry months of dust, and your body has learned the strange patience of long distances. Somewhere ahead, picks strike earth and shovels scrape gravel. Then tents begin appearing between the trees. Smoke rises above rough cabins. Men bend over streams. Supply wagons stand beside paths churned into mud and dust by constant traffic. The journey has ended. Camp life begins. The tents ahead are less impressive once you stand among them. From a distance, the camp looked almost cheerful beneath drifting smoke, but inside it you find mud, noise, crowded shelters, exhausted animals, and men attempting to build ordinary lives around extraordinary hopes. Your first concern is shelter. Some miners sleep beneath canvas stretched over poles, while others construct crude cabins from nearby timber. A fortunate man may find space inside a boarding house, although privacy becomes another luxury priced according to the demand. You choose a patch of ground near several other newcomers. The earth feels uneven beneath your boots, and yesterday's rain has left shallow pools between tents. Damp wool hangs from a rope nearby, carrying that stubborn smell of smoke, sweat, and weather that seems determined to follow everyone. Nobody looks particularly legendary. One miner struggles with a leaking canvas roof. Another searches angrily for a missing spoon. A third sits beside the fire repairing trousers whose knees have surrendered after weeks of kneeling beside rocky water. This is Gold Rush civilization. Mining camps appear quickly wherever promising deposits attracted enough workers. Some remain temporary clusters of tents, while others grow into settlements with stores, workshops, lodging houses, eating places, saloons, and offices. The speed can be startling. A quiet riverbank may hold a handful of miners 1 month and hundreds soon afterward. Trails deepen beneath boots and hooves. Trees disappear for firewood and construction, while piles of discarded gravel reshape the edges of streams. Historical collections associated with the University of California preserve diaries, newspapers, letters, and other evidence revealing how improvised these communities often were. Their records support a familiar historical fact: mining camps could grow faster than stable civic institutions developed around them. That instability reaches directly into daily life. You cannot simply arrive, select attractive ground, and assume everyone will respect your decision. Mining districts develop local customs concerning claims, boundaries, abandonment, and the amount of ground one person may hold. Rules vary from place to place. A meeting of miners may establish expectations for the district, especially where formal government remains distant or weak. Such arrangements can provide practical order, but they are not automatically fair, peaceful, or equally protective. You soon understand why boundaries matter. A promising claim might represent months of labour, and perhaps the best chance a miner believes he has for financial independence. Move a marker, misunderstand a boundary, or accuse someone of abandoning ground, and a disagreement can become serious. Most days, however, conflict is less dramatic. Daily existence demands too much energy. Before daylight fully reaches the camp, you hear movement outside, boots press into damp soil, tin cups knock against wooden surfaces. Someone coughs beside a smoking fire while another man complains about the cold. Breakfast is practical rather than memorable. Beans, bread, bacon, coffee, and simple preserved foods appear frequently where supplies allow them. Fresh ingredients depend heavily on location, season, transportation, and the willingness of miners to pay high prices. You swallow hot coffee while smoke stings your eyes. Nearby, a young man carefully unfolds a letter from home. The paper has softened along its creases because he has read it repeatedly. He smiles at one sentence, then folds it again without speaking. That quiet gesture changes the mood. Many miners are separated from wives, children, parents, siblings, and familiar communities. Their adventure may look bold from a distant newspaper office, but camp life can contain long stretches of homesickness and uncertainty. Letters become emotional anchors. Surviving correspondence shows miners describing work, prices, health, loneliness, success, and disappointment. Some present their circumstances confidently, while others admit that California differs sharply from expectations, and expectations are difficult things to bury. You came believing hard work might lead quickly toward wealth. Instead, hard work mostly leads toward another morning of hard work. Even entertainment reflects that tension. After daylight fades, men gather around fires, gambling tables, drinking establishments, or whatever social spaces the camp can support. Music occasionally drifts through the settlement, mixing with laughter, arguments, barking dogs, and horses shifting against their restraints. A fiddle carries through the dark for several minutes. The camp feels almost settled. Men who spent the day competing for opportunity share jokes and familiar songs, while tired shoulders relax beside firelight. Then tomorrow returns to everyone's thoughts. Prices remain a constant irritation, because mining settlements consume enormous quantities of supplies without necessarily producing food or manufactured goods locally. Merchants can charge prices that astonish newcomers. Transportation difficulties make ordinary items expensive, especially in remote districts. The miner learns arithmetic quickly. A good day must pay for food, tools, clothing, shelter, transportation, and whatever unexpected problem arrives next. A damaged boot suddenly matters. A broken shovel becomes urgent. Illness can stop earnings completely. Some people notice the commercial opportunity immediately. Merchants supply equipment. Teamsters move freight. Carpenters build structures. Cooks feed men who would rather pay than prepare meals after exhausting work. You'll begin wondering who is really mining whom. The joke circulates naturally because the gold rush creates wealth far beyond actual gold extraction. People arriving to mine sometimes discover that reliable services produce steadier income than searching unpredictable gravel. Still, historians disagree about how representative surviving camp descriptions are of ordinary experience. Scholars working at institutions including Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Chicago have examined Western records while confronting a persistent problem. People who left written accounts were not a perfect cross-section of everyone present. Some experiences remain faint in the record, others were deliberately exaggerated. Newspapers had reasons to celebrate spectacular discoveries. Disappointed miners sometimes had reasons to condemn California completely. Personal letters could be shaped by pride, embarrassment, hope, or the desire to reassure families. You live somewhere between those extremes. Tonight, Rain begins tapping against your canvas. A drop forms above your sleeping place, grows slowly, then falls directly onto your blanket. You shift several inches. Another drop finds you with impressive determination. Luxury remains postponed. Outside, muddy water runs between tents toward the stream. Wood smoke hangs low beneath the wet night air, and the camp gradually becomes quieter. You lie awake listening. There is horse breath beyond the canvas, followed by the soft clink of metal equipment. Someone nearby murmurs in sleep. Farther away, laughter fades from a crowded drinking room. Your body aches from travel and preparation, yet beneath the exhaustion, excitement survives. Tomorrow you will finally stand in the water with tools in your hands. You will learn whether the bright promise that carried you across a continent can survive contact with cold rivers, heavy gravel, and repetition. Because gold does not simply leap into your pocket, you must learn how to find it. Morning reaches the camp through pale mist, and you step toward the river carrying the tools that now represent your future. The water looks peaceful from shore, but the moment your boots enter the current, cold presses through leather and cloth. Your fingers soon stiffen around the pan. Around you, other miners are already working. Shovels bite into gravel, wooden rockers creak beside the bank, and sluice boxes channel muddy water through carefully arranged riffles. Yesterday, gold mining was an idea. Today it becomes technique. You begin with the simplest and most famous tool, the gold pan, into its shallow metal surface. You shovel gravel collected from places where heavier materials may naturally settle. Then you add water and begin washing. The movement requires more control than expected. You gently shake and rotate the pan, allowing lighter sand and stones to escape while heavier material sinks toward the bottom. Gold is unusually dense. That physical property makes placer mining possible because moving water naturally sorts materials by weight. Over time, gold particles can accumulate in cracks, behind rocks, along bends, and within layers of river gravel. You learn to read the stream differently. A large boulder is no longer simply a place to sit. It becomes an obstacle that may have slowed ancient currents, allowing heavy particles to settle behind it. A crack in exposed bedrock suddenly deserves attention. Your hands remain submerged while you clear mud from narrow spaces. Cold water burns against your skin, and tiny stones work beneath your fingernails. Then something bright catches the light. Your heart quickens. You lean closer, protecting the remaining sediment with ridiculous seriousness. After another careful movement, the bright speck remains at the bottom. Perhaps this is it. Perhaps fortune has arrived before lunch. Then an experienced miner glances over and tells you that your magnificent treasure is probably mica. The camp provides another useful lesson in humility. You keep working. Placer mining dominates much early gold rush activity because surface deposits can be worked without the elaborate underground systems that later mining demands. Historical evidence studied through collections at the University of California and Sanford helps document how rapidly miners adapted simple methods to larger operations. Panning works, but it processes limited material. Once you understand that problem, the rocker begins looking attractive. Sometimes called a cradle, it allows one or more workers to wash larger quantities of gravel through a wooden apparatus. Water and gravel enter above. Rocking motion helps separate material, while screens remove larger stones. Heavier particles, including gold when fortune cooperates, collect lower in the device rather than washing away with lighter sediment. The work becomes cooperative. One man shovels gravel, another supplies water. Someone operates the rocker while everyone develops strong opinions about whether everybody else is performing his job properly. Gentle sarcasm survives even in cold water. As mining camps grow, sluice boxes become increasingly important where suitable water and terrain allow their use. These long wooden channels direct flowing water across gravel, while riffles or other trapping materials catch heavier particles. Now the scale begins changing. Instead of patiently swirling one pan, you process far greater quantities of earth. The principle remains familiar, but the amount of material passing before you increases dramatically. So does the labor. You shovel until your shoulders tighten and your palms develop painful blisters. Wet sleeves cling to your arms. Mud reaches places that mud should never reasonably reach. By afternoon, your back protests every movement. Still, nobody stops when promising color appears. A few visible flakes can restore energy with astonishing speed. Suddenly, aching muscles become negotiable, supper can wait, and daylight seems far too precious to waste. This emotional rhythm defines much of mining. Hope rises quickly, then collapses beneath empty gravel. A disappointing morning may become an encouraging afternoon, while a promising claim can weaken after days of diminishing returns. Luck matters, but knowledge matters too. Experienced miners study geological patterns, water movement, gravel layers, and signs left by previous channels. They learn that rivers change course over long periods, leaving valuable deposits far from present water. Historical geology now explains these processes more precisely, and research across universities such as Harvard and the University of California has deepened modern understanding of Western landscapes. Yet miners of the period build practical knowledge through observation, conversation, experimentation, and costly mistakes. Some knowledge is shared, other knowledge is guarded carefully. A miner who believes he has discovered unusually rich ground may become remarkably vague when asked where he spent yesterday. Friendly conversation suddenly develops impressive limits. Claims encourage secrecy because success attracts attention. You notice this after someone finds several promising pieces upstream. By the following morning, men appear nearby carrying tools, provisions, and expressions suggesting that their arrival is entirely coincidental. Gold travels slowly through rock. Rumors travel much faster. Historians still debate how strongly individual skill influenced success compared with timing. Access to productive ground, capital, social connections, and chance. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and Princeton have approached gold rush mobility from different perspectives, and surviving accounts rarely provide one simple formula for prosperity. The evidence does reveal one stubborn truth. Most miners do not become fabulously rich. Some earn respectable amounts. Others experience brief periods of success before deposits weaken. Many struggle to cover expenses, especially after the easiest surface deposits become crowded or exhausted. Your own pan teaches that lesson quietly. Hours pass between meaningful discoveries. Tiny flakes appear occasionally, bright against dark sediment, but their combined weight feels almost insulting beside the effort required to collect them. You place them carefully inside a small container anyway. Every speck matters. Around sunset, the river changes color beneath the lowering sky. The day's harsh glare softens, and cool air settles across the valley. You straighten slowly. Your shoulders ache, fingers wrinkle from water, and trousers remain soaked below the knees. A blister has opened beneath one palm, making the wooden shovel handle unpleasant to hold. Beside you, another miner examines his day's recovery. He has less than yesterday. His face changes almost imperceptibly before he closes the container. Perhaps he promised someone at home that California would make everything easier. Perhaps he already knows that promise is becoming difficult to keep. Tomorrow he will return. So will you. There is always another patch of gravel, another bend, another rumor from upstream. The possibility of one rich discovery makes leaving harder than arriving. But the methods are already evolving, as thousands compete for accessible deposits. Individual pans and rockers begin giving way to larger systems. More water will be redirected, more earth will be moved, more money will enter mining. Before that transformation fully arrives, the camps themselves begin spreading outward. Tents become buildings, trails become streets, and wherever miners gather with gold in their pockets, entire towns begin rising around their hunger for food, shelter, supplies, entertainment, and another chance tomorrow. The wooden channels beside the river keep carrying water through gravel, but your attention gradually shifts toward the settlement behind you. What began as scattered canvas shelters now seems to change each time you return from the diggings. Fresh boards appear beside the muddy track. A carpenter raises another wall. A merchant unloads sacks of flour from a wagon while two exhausted mules stand nearby, their harness leather darkened with sweat. The camp is becoming a town. You notice the transformation first through sound. Hammers strike timber throughout the morning, saw blaze rust through boards, horses stamp beside hitching posts, and human voices compete across increasingly crowded streets. Yesterday, this place existed for gold. Now gold supports everything else. A miner returning from the river needs supper, dry clothing, replacement tools, somewhere to sleep, and perhaps something stronger than coffee after 12 hours of shoveling gravel. Businesses gather around those needs. General stores offer picks, shovels, pans, boots, blankets, candles, tobacco, preserved food, and countless small necessities that become surprisingly precious when the nearest established supply center lies far away. Prices can be painful. Freight must travel over difficult roads, rivers, or mountain routes before reaching isolated districts. A storm, damaged bridge, exhausted animal team, or seasonal change can interrupt supplies and increase costs rapidly. Or begin examining every purchase carefully. The handle of your shovel has cracked near the base, but replacing the entire tool means surrendering part of your uncertain earnings. You repair it with cord and stubborn optimism instead. The repair looks terrible. It works. That practical attitude shapes much of town life, because permanent institutions often arrive after population growth has already begun. Mining communities may develop with remarkable speed whenever a promising strike becomes widely known. Historical newspapers and archival collections preserved by the University of California document this restless pattern across the gold rush landscape. Settlements could expand quickly during prosperous periods, then decline just as rapidly when nearby deposit disappointed miners. A town therefore lives on confidence, as long as people believe tomorrow's ground may be richer than today's. Merchants keep stocking shelves and newcomers keep arriving. When confidence disappears, empty buildings can follow surprisingly soon. For now, confidence is everywhere. You walk past a rough-eating house where steam clouds the windows. Inside, miners sit shoulder to shoulder over simple meals, eating with the concentration of men who have spent daylight burning through energy. The smell almost pulls you inside. Fried meat mingles with coffee, wood smoke, onions, and damp clothing drying near the stove. Your stomach immediately reminds you that optimism is not technically food. Farther along stands a boarding house. Beds may be crowded into limited rooms, and sleeping arrangements rarely resemble comfortable Eastern hotels. Yet a roof, mattress, and dry blanket can feel magnificent after weeks beneath leaking canvas. Some entrepreneurs understand this perfectly. They do not need to find gold underground when miners willingly carry gold dust through the front door. Lodging, meals, laundry, transport, construction, and retail trade can provide income more reliably than uncertain claims. Harvard historians and other scholars of American economic history have long placed gold rush development within this wider commercial transformation. The familiar prospector remains important. But mining also creates demand for transportation, finance, agriculture, manufacturing, and urban services. You can see that network forming around you. A blacksmith works near an open doorway, heating iron until it glows before hammering a damaged fitting back into shape. Sparks scatter while waiting customers discuss claims, prices, and rumors. Nearby, someone opens a bakery. Someone else prints a newspaper. Information becomes almost as valuable as equipment because every new strike can redirect population. A printed report mentioning rich discoveries upstream may empty one district and crowd another within days. Of course, newspapers also compete for readers. Sensational stories travel beautifully. A modest discovery can grow during retelling until every shovel supposedly uncovers wealth. You have already learned to greet such stories with interest, suspicion, and the uncomfortable possibility that one might actually be true. The town also needs order. Mining populations bring property disputes, debt disagreements, theft accusations, drunken quarrels, and arguments over claims. Formal legal institutions exist unevenly, especially during the early rush, so communities sometimes rely on locally created rules and improvised enforcement. California becomes a state, yet statehood does not instantly place a courthouse, sheriff, judge, and reliable legal process in every remote mining settlement. Distance remains powerful, and local practices continue shaping everyday justice. You attend a miners' meeting one evening. Men gather beneath fading daylight while a dispute over a claim is discussed publicly. Voices remain controlled at first, then become sharper as witnesses describe who worked which ground and when. Nobody considers this abstract. The disputed earth might determine whether someone eats comfortably next month. Mining districts often develop claim rules because federal mineral policy has not yet produced a complete framework suited to the sudden rush. Local custom therefore plays a major role in defining possession and acceptable mining practice. The improvisation can create functional order. It can also create. Historians continue debating how these early institutions should be judged. Researchers at Stanford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have examined whether mining camp democracy encouraged practical participation while simultaneously reinforcing racial, economic, and gender inequalities. Both patterns can exist together. You feel that contradiction while walking the street after dark. A saloon spills lamplight across muddy ground. Laughter rises from inside, followed by music and the scrape of chairs. Several miners crowd around gaming tables, wagering earnings that required days of cold labor to collect. Entertainment has become business too, for men separated from families and familiar communities. Social spaces offer relief from repetitive work. They also provide opportunities for spending money at astonishing speed. One miner enters carrying several days of success and leaves considerably lighter. You decide your blanket suddenly seems fascinating. Not everyone in town is a miner, and not everyone intends to remain temporarily. Families appear in growing settlements, alongside craftspeople, professionals, laborers, traders, and people offering services that increasingly resemble ordinary urban life. Church congregation form. Schools eventually appear in more established communities. Volunteer fire organizations become necessary where wooden buildings, open flames, crowded streets, and limited water create obvious danger. Fire is a constant fear. A tipped lamp can destroy buildings faster than exhausted residents can respond. Towns built rapidly from timber may burn and rebuild with the same stubborn speed that created them. Environmental conditions remain equally physical. After rain, streets turn into mud beneath wagons and horses. During dry weather, dust rises into your face, settles across merchandise, and works beneath clothing. Nothing stays clean for long. Yet the settlement keeps expanding. A new hotel rises near the main street. Freight wagons arrive with barrels and crates. A newspaper sheet appears announcing another discovery beyond the hills. You stop and read. For a moment, the old excitement returns with uncomfortable force. Perhaps your claim is already fading. Perhaps richer ground lies somewhere beyond the ridge. Perhaps tomorrow should begin with a packed blanket and a new trail. Around you, other miners are thinking exactly the same thing. That restless movement gives boomtowns their strange energy. They are communities built by people who may leave the instant another place promises more. Still tonight the buildings remain crowded. Smoke rises from chimneys beneath the darkening sky. Wet boots scrape wooden floors. Coins cross counters. Meals disappear from plates. And tired miners exchange stories beneath warm lamplight. The wilderness has not vanished. It has simply acquired a main street, and behind that busy street, beneath laughter and commerce, another reality waits. Gold does not guarantee fortune, and the human body cannot live forever on expectation. Soon the costs become harder to ignore. The town behind you grows louder and more confident, yet your own calculations become quieter with every passing week. Gold still glitters occasionally at the bottom of your pan, but those bright fragments now compete against food, clothing, tools, lodging, and the simple cost of remaining alive. The arithmetic is uncomfortable. You wake before sunrise beneath a blanket that smells of wood smoke and damp wool. Cold morning air reaches through gaps in the cabin wall, while yesterday's exhausted muscles remind you exactly how the previous day was spent. Your hands hurt first. Blisters have hardened into calluses, but cracked skin still opens around your fingers. A shovel handle does not care about ambition, and river stones show no sympathy for anyone who crossed a continent. You eat quickly. Breakfast provides enough strength for another day beside the water, although nobody would confuse it with luxury. Cold beans sometimes return from yesterday, accompanied by bread and coffee when supplies permit. Then you walk towards the claim. The trail is muddy after overnight rain. Wet earth grips your boots, and each step produces the soft sucking sound of ground reluctant to release them. By daylight, you are working. You lift gravel, move stones, direct water, clear channels, and inspect sediment. The motions become familiar enough that your thoughts wander while your body continues almost automatically. That is when homesickness arrives. Perhaps you remember a kitchen thousands of miles away, where someone once complained about ordinary weather and ordinary bills. Those problems now seem almost elegant. You wonder whether your family received your last letter. Mail moves slowly, and uncertainty fills the spaces between messages. A child may have grown noticeably before the next letter arrives. A parent may become ill while you remain unaware beside a California river. The emotional distance can exceed the physical one. Surviving letters and diaries preserved in major American archival collections reveal that many miners struggled with isolation, uncertainty, illness, and disappointment. Historians working with collections at Yale, Harvard, and the University of California have used such personal records to reconstruct daily gold rush experience beyond spectacular success stories. Those records complicate the legend. A handful of miners certainly make remarkable discoveries, especially during early periods when accessible deposits remain less crowded. Yet wealth is uneven, temporary, and often dependent upon location, timing, knowledge, equipment, and chance. Many workers earn returns, others lose money. Your own claim demonstrates how quickly conditions change. During the first week, several promising flakes encouraged everyone. By the fourth, you process more gravel for smaller rewards. Still, leaving feels difficult. The next layer might be richer. The next bend might contain a deposit missed by everyone else. Tomorrow could justify every miserable day that came before it. This uncertainty becomes psychologically powerful. You are not merely working for today's earnings. You are purchasing another chance at tomorrow's discovery, and that possibility can keep exhausted people digging long after confidence begins fading. Meanwhile, expenses continue without hesitation. Food must be purchased whether the claim produces gold or not. Boots wear through, tools break, blankets tear, transportation costs money, and medical care may be limited or expensive. One afternoon your foot slips between wet stones while carrying a loaded bucket. You catch yourself before falling badly, but pain travels through your ankle. For several seconds, everything becomes still. A serious injury could end your season. Mining places enormous physical demands on bodies already weakened by the difficult journeys and uneven diets. Cuts can become infected, backs can fail, and accidents occur around unstable ground. Moving water, tools, animals, and increasingly complex machinery. Disease presents another danger. Mining settlements often grow faster than sanitation systems. Crowded living conditions, questionable water sources, poor drainage, and limited medical knowledge can allow sickness to spread rapidly. Cholera becomes particularly feared in 19th century migration and settlement. You do not need modern epidemiology to understand fear when several beds become empty. Camp conversations grow softer, and familiar laughter disappears from places where it sounded only days earlier. Death rarely resembles the legend. It may arrive through fever rather than gunfire, through accident rather than adventure. A man can survive mountains and deserts only to become dangerously ill within sight of the goldfields. The camp absorbs these losses. Someone takes over unfinished work. A few possessions are gathered. A letter may eventually travel home carrying news that nobody wished to write. Then the shovels resume. Economic pressure leaves little room for prolonged reflection. Researchers at institutions, including Stanford and the University of Chicago, have examined gold rush mobility as part of wider labor and market changes in the American West. One mainstream conclusion remains clear. Mining communities depended upon interconnected systems of labor, supply, transportation, and credit rather than isolated prospectors alone. Your daily life proves the point. Without the merchant, you lack supplies. Without freight workers, the merchant has empty shelves. Without farmers and food producers, neither of you last very long. The independent miner is never completely independent. Historians still debate how much social mobility the gold rush truly created for ordinary participants. Some evidence reveals genuine opportunities for advancement, while other records show repeated failure, inequality, and wealth increasingly concentrated around successful enterprises and capital. The answer depends partly upon whom you follow. A fortunate miner might return home with savings enough to purchase land. Another may abandon mining and prosper as a merchant. Someone else leaves California poorer than when he arrived. And some never leave. You begin noticing men who arrived expecting one season and remain years later. Their clothing changes, their expectations narrow, and the language of sudden wealth slowly becomes the language of making a living. That change is almost invisible. One evening, you sit outside the cabin, rubbing warmth into swollen fingers. Smoke drifts low across the settlement while rain taps against canvas shelters farther down the slope. A miner beside you opens a small pouch. His week's recovery rests inside. He studies it without smiling. After food and supplies, little remains. He mentions a wife waiting back east, then falls silent and watches sparks lift from the fire. Nobody offers easy encouragement. You understand too well. Tomorrow, he may continue mining. He may sell his tools. He may hear another rumor and disappear toward a distant creek before breakfast. Gold keeps people moving, yet the goldfields themselves are changing as this movement continues. The people filling these settlements come from different regions, nations, occupations, and social worlds. They do not experience California equally. Behind the familiar image of the bearded miner stands a much larger community of workers, families, migrants, traders, cooks, entrepreneurs, and people whose labor rarely appears in romantic paintings. Their stories are already surrounding you. You hear unfamiliar accents across the street. Laundry hangs behind a boarding house. A woman negotiates payment with a customer, while a cook carries steaming plates through a crowded doorway. The mining frontier is becoming a complicated society, and its diversity will reveal both opportunity and exclusion. The voices across the street grow clearer as evening settles over the camp, and you begin noticing how incomplete the familiar image of the solitary miner really is. Gold has drawn thousands toward California, but picks and pans represent only part of the labor sustaining this restless society. Everywhere, someone is working. Behind the boarding house, wet shirts hang from lines stretched between rough posts. Inside, a cook bends over a hot stove while steam rises around heavy pots and hungry customers wait impatiently. Across town, merchants unpack crates. Teamsters guide wagons through deeply rutted streets. Carpenters raise walls, blacksmiths repair tools, and workers unload supplies needed by people who spend their daylight moving gravel. The goldfields depend upon all of them. California's population changes dramatically during the rush, attracting migrants from across the United States and many other parts of the world. People arrive by land and sea, carrying different languages, skills, expectations, and amounts of money. You hear those differences every day. A crowded street might contain experienced sailors, farmers from eastern states, merchants from Europe, miners from Mexico, workers from Chile, and newcomers from China. Some have mined before, others learn after arriving. The international character of the gold rush is a mainstream historical fact supported by shipping records, census material, newspapers, correspondence, and other surviving evidence. Scholars at institutions including Stanford and the University of California have examined how global migration transformed California during these years. The rush belongs to no single background, yet opportunity is never distributed evenly. You see that contradiction while entering a supply store one afternoon. Two customers discuss mining ground while a merchant weighs goods behind the counter, and another worker carries boxes through a rear doorway. Everyone participates in the same economy. They do not receive the same treatment. Mexican and Chilean miners are already familiar with techniques suited to mining environments in the wider Americas. Their experience can be valuable during the early rush, especially when many newcomers possess enthusiasm but little practical knowledge. Experience does not guarantee acceptance. Competition over productive ground encourages hostility, and racial prejudice becomes entangled with economic rivalry. Foreign miners increasingly face discriminatory policies designed to restrict access or extract revenue. California introduces a foreign miners tax in 1850. The law particularly affects miners from Latin America, although enforcement and later legislation develop within a changing political environment. Another foreign miners tax enacted in 1852 becomes especially burdensome for Chinese miners. The policy reveals something uncomfortable. Gold Rush society may celebrate individual opportunity while governments and local communities limit whose opportunity receives protection. Economic competition makes prejudice profitable, and legal discrimination can turn social hostility into material disadvantage. Historians continue debating how migration, race, class, and citizenship interacted across different mining districts. Researchers at Yale, Princeton, and the University of Chicago have approached these questions through legal records, demographic evidence, newspapers, and personal accounts. The experiences vary greatly. No single camp represents the entire West. Chinese migration becomes increasingly important during the 1850s. Many migrants arrive hoping mining or related work will provide earnings unavailable at home, often maintaining strong obligations toward relatives and communities across the Pacific. You watch a group entering town with supplies. Their clothing is dusty from travel, and their possessions have been packed for movement. They are not wandering into an empty landscape, but entering an economy already shaped by claims, merchants, regulations, and established competition. Chinese miners often work deposits others have abandoned. Careful organization can make apparently exhausted ground productive again, especially when coordinated labor allows larger quantities of material to be processed. Their success can produce admiration. It can also produce resentment. That resentment will become increasingly dangerous as the century continues. But even now you sense how quickly economic anxiety can turn neighbors into targets. Then there are the women. Popular memory often portrays gold rush camps as overwhelmingly male, which is broadly accurate during the earliest migration. Yet women are present, and their numbers increase as communities become more established. Their circumstances differ widely. Some arrive with husbands or relatives, others operate boarding houses, restaurants, laundries, shops, or other businesses. Some perform domestic labor that becomes highly valuable in settlements where basic services remain scarce. A clean shirt can command attention. After weeks of mud, sweat, smoke, and river water, miners discover that laundry possesses almost mystical qualities. The person providing it is performing labor that supports the entire mining economy. Now begin seeing domestic work differently. Preparing meals for dozens of customers requires purchasing supplies, maintaining fires, carrying water, cleaning equipment, and working through heat that can become exhausting. A boarding house demands similar persistence. Beds require maintenance. Floors collect endless mud. Guests arrive at inconvenient hours and occasionally believe paying for a mattress entitles them to behave like minor royalty. Some frontier habits survive civilization remarkably well. Women entrepreneurs can earn significant incomes, where demand for their labor is high, yet the historical record also shows unequal legal rights, social restrictions, personal danger, and limited options. Opportunity exists beside constraint. That pattern repeats across mining society. African Americans also participate in Western migration and mining, including both free people and those brought into California under conditions connected to slavery, despite California entering the Union as a free state in 1850. The contradiction becomes politically significant. California's free state status does not erase racial discrimination. Black residents confront restrictions affecting testimony, citizenship, economic security, and everyday treatment. Still, communities form. People establish businesses, pursue claims, build networks, and challenge the boundaries imposed upon them. Their presence further weakens the simple picture of one kind of miner creating the West alone. You notice children, too. In more settled communities, family life begins altering the rhythm of streets. The sound of children near houses feels strangely different from the rough voices and mining equipment that dominated earlier camps. Schools appear where populations become stable enough. Churches and voluntary associations follow. A settlement once designed around temporary extraction begins acquiring institutions that suggest people expect to remain. That expectation changes architecture. Canvas gives way to timber. Stores expand. Homes contain more than bedrolls and mining equipment. Gardens may appear where soil and water permit them. Yet everything remains connected to mineral wealth. When nearby claims weaken, families and businesses must decide whether to stay, relocate, or rebuild their livelihoods around something other than mining. You feel that uncertainty tonight. Wood smoke settles over the street as lamps glow behind windows. A cook scrapes the bottom of a pot after the final customers leave. Someone folds freshly washed clothing. A merchant counts the day's receipts while a teamster checks a horse's injured leg in the stable. Farther away, miners return beneath fading light, carrying tools across tired shoulders. These lives rarely become legends, yet without them, the legendary miner cannot remain beside the river for long. You stand among a society becoming larger, more diverse, and more permanent than anyone besides Sutter's Mill could have predicted. But diversity does not automatically produce harmony. A's claims become harder to secure and competition intensifies. Differences of nationality and race become convenient excuses for exclusion. Arguments sharpen, laws discriminate, and the hopeful mining frontier begins revealing how violently people may defend opportunity when they believe there is not enough to share. The arguments you sensed around the claims no longer remain background noise. As accessible gold becomes harder to find, competition sharpens, and the generous language of opportunity begins colliding with fear, prejudice, property, and survival. You feel the change around ordinary conversations. A stranger asking where you worked yesterday once seemed merely curious. Now you hesitate before answering because a careless description might bring 20 miners toward promising ground by sunrise. Claim boundaries become serious matters in many districts. Miners rely upon locally created rules defining how much ground one person may claim, how boundaries should be marked, and how frequently a claim must be worked. These customs provide practical order. They also depend upon communities deciding who belongs within that order. One morning, raised voices pull you from your work. Several men stand beside wooden stakes marking neighboring claims, arguing over whether a boundary has been moved. Mud covers everyone's boots. The disputed strip of gravel looks almost worthless from where you stand, yet beneath it may lie enough gold to change someone's season, repay debts, or finance the journey home. Suddenly, a few feet of earth matters enormously. Other miners gather nearby. Some listen carefully, while others choose sides before hearing much evidence. Local rules are discussed. Memories conflict, and certainty grows faster than agreement. Eventually, the dispute settles without serious violence. You return to work relieved. Not every disagreement ends so quietly. The popular image of the Wild West often turns mining camps into places where gunfire solves every inconvenience. Historical reality is less theatrical. Although violence remains a genuine part of Gold Rush society, formal institutions expand over time. Courts, sheriffs, judges, and elected governments increasingly shape legal life as California develops after statehood. Yet distant settlements can still experience weak enforcement, slow procedures, and deep distrust of official authority. That environment encourages vigilantism. The most famous examples emerge in San Francisco, where vigilance committees formed during the 1850s. Supporters present such movements as responses to crime, corruption, and ineffective government. Critics see something more dangerous. Private citizens are claiming powers normally associated with courts and government. Once a crowd decides that formal procedures are too slow, the distance between community protection and coercion can become frighteningly small. Research by historians at Stanford and the University of California has placed California vigilantism within wider debates about law, political authority, and rapid urban development. The mainstream record shows that vigilantism was neither simple frontier justice nor meaningless disorder. It reflected contested power. You sense that tension even in smaller camps. A theft accusation spreads one evening after mining equipment disappears from a cabin. Men search nearby shelters, and suspicion settles upon newcomers before any reliable evidence appears. The mood changes quickly. You watch faces tighten beneath lamplight while rain begins striking the roof. Nobody wants to lose valuable tools, especially when replacing them may consume several days of earnings. But fear is impatient. A man who seemed ordinary yesterday can become suspicious because his accent differs, because he arrived recently, or because someone remembers an argument from the previous week. That pattern becomes especially dangerous for minority communities. Foreign miners encounter hostility from Americans who believe California's mineral wealth should belong primarily to them. Economic competition blends with racial prejudice, allowing exclusion to appear respectable beneath the language of ownership and entitlement. Mexican miners suffer intimidation and displacement. Chilean miners also face violence and discrimination in some districts. Chinese miners increasingly become targets of hostile taxation, harassment, forced removal from claims, and physical attacks. The foreign miners' tax reinforces inequality, although the law changes over time. Its practical effect helps make nationality and race economically significant within the diggings. Chinese miners become particularly important targets after the 1852 legislation. The injustice is visible in ordinary details. Imagine working a claim everyone else considered exhausted. You organize labor carefully, recover enough gold to make the ground worthwhile, and then discover that success attracts both taxation and resentment. Prosperity can make you less safe. Historical evidence from California newspapers, court records, legislative documents, and personal correspondence supports this darker side of the rush. Scholars at Yale, Harvard, and Columbia have examined how racial categories became embedded within Western law and economic competition. Still, historians debate the balance between local cooperation and conflict. Some mining communities develop practical relationships across cultural boundaries, especially where trade and shared labor encouraged cooperation. Other places experienced exclusion, intimidation, and organized violence. The frontier contains both realities. No single story is sufficient. You encounter that complexity at a crowded store after work. Men from several backgrounds stand beneath the same roof, purchasing flour, candles, boots, and mining equipment from the same shelves. For a few minutes, commerce seems ordinary. Then an argument begins outside. Someone claims another miner has entered occupied ground. Voices rise, people gather, and the shopkeeper quietly moves several fragile items farther from the doorway. Experience has taught him something. You remain near the wall. Nobody fires a weapon. Nobody performs the dramatic gestures later Western stories will adore. Instead, several minors intervene, boundaries are examined, and the argument gradually loses heat. Ordinary restraint rarely becomes legend, yet it matters historically. Most people cannot maintain functioning communities if every disagreement ends violently. Mining districts require cooperation to build roads, move water, transport supplies, enforce claims, and survive environmental hazards. Violence exists beside negotiation. The same society capable of forming committees and local regulations can also use collective power against vulnerable people. Women face their own dangers. The gender imbalance of many early camps creates unusual social conditions, while women working in businesses or domestic services may encounter harassment, economic dependence, or limited legal protection. Individual experiences differ greatly. Some women achieve financial independence through businesses that mining demand makes profitable. Others find frontier opportunity constrained by the same social expectations carried west from older communities. Gold changes geography faster than human prejudice. That becomes increasingly clear. At sunset, you walk toward your cabin through a street hardened after several dry days. Dust coats your trousers, while warm air carries horse sweat, cooking smoke, and the metallic ringing of a blacksmith's hammer. A notice has been posted nearby. Several men gather to read it. The announcement concerns local mining rules, reminding claim holders about boundaries and required work. The language seems simple, but you now understand how much power rests behind those instructions. A claim means access. Access means income. Income means food, shelter, mobility, and perhaps the possibility of returning home with something to show for years of sacrifice. People defend such possibility fiercely. You enter your cabin and place your gold carefully inside a small container. Outside, conversations continue beneath the evening darkness. Somebody laughs near the boarding house. A horse shifts against its hitching rail. Farther away, an argument dissolves into silence before becoming anything worse. You listen for another moment. California once promised a landscape where fortune seemed available to anyone willing to search. Now experience has taught you that opportunity is shaped by law, power, identity, capital, and the willingness of others to recognize your claim, and an even deeper conflict waits beneath your feet. These mining districts are not empty lands. Long before prospectors arrived, indigenous communities lived beside these rivers, depended upon these ecosystems, and built societies across the mountains and valleys now being transformed by mining. The rush is entering their world with devastating force. The ground beneath your boots carries a history far older than the wooden stakes marking mining claims. Before prospectors named these creeks, according to discoveries, indigenous communities had lived across California through countless generations, building economies and social worlds around landscapes the newcomers often misunderstood. You notice traces everywhere once you learn to look. A trail follows terrain too intelligently to be accidental. Oak woodland stretches across a nearby slope, while the river supports fish, plants, animals, and seasonal resources connected to established patterns of life. The country was never empty. California before the gold rush contained one of the most culturally diverse indigenous populations in North America. Numerous distinct peoples occupied environments ranging from coastal regions and valleys to forests, foothills, mountains, and deserts. Their lives cannot be reduced to one pattern. Communities possessed different languages, political traditions, technologies, trade networks, spiritual practices, and relationships with local environments. The mining rush enters this complex world with astonishing speed. At first, individual encounters vary. Some indigenous people trade with newcomers, some work for miners or settlers, while others attempt to maintain distance from the rapidly expanding population. But the balance changes quickly. Thousands become tens of thousands, and the newcomers require land, food, timber, transportation routes, water, and mining ground. Each demand reaches beyond the narrow riverbed where gold is being recovered. You see the environmental transformation directly. Miners dig into stream banks and move enormous quantities of gravel. Trees are cut for cabins, fires, mine supports, and expanding settlements. Water is redirected. Channels change. The clear stream you first imagined in 1848 becomes increasingly cloudy around heavily worked areas. Mud and sediment travel downstream, altering places far beyond the immediate claim. Your boots sink into disturbed earth beside the bank. The smell is wet clay, wood smoke, and crushed vegetation. A shovel strikes stone nearby, followed by another, then another, until human labour seems to become part of the river's sound. For indigenous communities, those sounds can announce disruption. Food systems depend upon specific places and seasons: salmon fisheries, plant gathering areas, hunting grounds, oak landscapes, and water sources can all suffer when settlement and mining expand rapidly. The effects accumulate. Historical records and modern scholarship associated with institutions, including the University of California, have documented the catastrophic demographic decline experienced by California native peoples during the 19th century. Disease, displacement, starvation, violence, forced labor, and destructive government policies all contribute. Gold is not the only cause. The rush accelerates nearly everything. Population growth increases pressure on land while political institutions develop under settler control. Native communities face a society increasingly determined to occupy territory and reorganize it around mining, farming, towns, and private property. California becomes a state in 50. That same year, the state legislature passes a law concerning the government and protection of indigenous people. Despite its protective language, the system enables coercive labor practices and severe abuses. The legal environment becomes deeply unequal. Native people can be arrested under broad conditions, compelled into labor arrangements, and denied meaningful protection against exploitation. Children are particularly vulnerable. You imagine a family watching strangers cross familiar ground while legal authority increasingly belongs to those strangers. The transformation is not distant politics. It enters daily life. A path may become a wagon road. A gathering place may become private property. A stream may become a mining channel filled with sediment and equipment. Then violence deepens the crisis. Some miners and settlers attack indigenous communities in retaliation for real or alleged thefts, livestock losses, or resistance. Punitive expeditions can target people far beyond those involved in the original dispute. Native resistance also occurs. Communities defend territory, resources, families, and independence under extraordinary pressure. Yet the enormous growth of the settler population, combined with state and federal power, creates devastating imbalance. Accounts differ over individual incidents. Some contemporary reports contradict one another, and perpetrators sometimes describe events in language designed to justify their actions. Historians must compare newspapers, government records, military reports, local accounts, and indigenous evidence carefully. The broader pattern is clearer. Researchers at Yale, Stanford, and the University of California have contributed to a historical understanding that rejects the older image of peaceful settlement across vacant land. Expansion carried profound human costs. There remains scholarly debate over how particular episodes should be classified, how population losses should be measured, and how local violence interacted with state policy. The disagreement concerns interpretation and detail, not whether indigenous communities suffered catastrophic disruption. You feel the weight of that distinction. From your claim, the gold rush once looked like a personal struggle between labor and luck. Now the river connects your shovel to consequences extending far beyond your own intentions. You may never attack anyone. You may consider yourself fair. Eat your food. Claim, Timber, roads, laws, and settlement exist within a larger transformation that removes indigenous control over land and resources. History rarely keeps responsibility simple. That evening, exhausted silence settles around the diggings. Your fingers ache from cold water, and dried mud forms pale cracks across your boots. Across the stream, smoke rises through trees where the light is already fading. You hear water moving around stones. For a moment, you try to imagine the same river before mining. No sluice boxes interrupt the current. No shovels scrape the banks. The thought does not last. Someone calls from upstream and work resumes. As the 1850s advance, mining technology becomes more aggressive. The easily reached placer deposits cannot satisfy thousands of workers forever, especially when profitable ground becomes increasingly difficult to find. Miners search higher slopes. They investigate ancient riverbeds buried beneath earth. Companies construct canals and ditches to carry water toward places where natural streams cannot provide enough. Individual labor begins joining larger systems. Capital becomes more important. A miner with one pan can work shallow gravel, but deeper deposits require equipment, organized labor, engineering, and money. The landscape responds visibly. Hillsides are cut open. Water travels through constructed channels. Timber structures climb across rough terrain. Your world is becoming industrial. The old image of one person kneeling beside a stream does not disappear immediately, but it no longer defines the direction of mining. You notice the change when several men discuss joining a larger operation. Their own claims have weakened. A company offers wages. Regular pay lacks the intoxicating possibility of discovering a personal fortune, but it also lacks some of the uncertainty that has followed you since arrival. You understand the temptation. Your small pouch of gold feels lighter than the years invested in finding it. Your back aches before morning, and another rumor no longer produces quite the excitement it once did. Perhaps the frontier is changing faster than you are. Across California, the same transformation is unfolding. Simple placer methods increasingly coexist with larger operations capable of moving quantities of earth that early miners could barely imagine. The environmental consequences will grow with them. So will the financial stakes. The gold miner is becoming something different, less solitary, more specialized, and increasingly dependent upon machinery owned by people who may never stand ankle deep in a mountain stream. The age of the pan is giving way to the age of power. The change begins with water, the same force that carried flakes into gravel long before you arrived. Instead of standing quietly inside the river, miners increasingly capture that water, redirect it, concentrate its force, and make entire hillsides surrender their earth. Your old pan suddenly feels very small. Across the slopes, wooden channels carry water from distant sources toward mining ground that earlier prospectors could barely reach. Ditches wind along hillsides, sometimes stretching across difficult terrain through remarkable feats of practical engineering. Water has become infrastructure. You follow one channel uphill during a cool morning, hearing the steady rush beneath wooden boards. Pine resin mixes with damp soil, while fresh saw marks brighten the timber supporting sections above uneven ground. Nothing about this operation feels solitary. Workers maintain channels, repair supports, manage water, remove debris, and coordinate equipment. Investors provide capital for projects requiring far more money than one exhausted prospector could reasonably supply. The goldfield is becoming industrial. Hydraulic mining represents one of the most dramatic expressions of this transformation. Developed in California during the early 1850s, the method uses powerful streams of water to attack gold-bearing gravel deposits. The principle sounds almost simple. Water is collected at elevation and delivered through pipes under pressure. A nozzle directs the resulting jet against banks or hillsides, breaking enormous quantities of material apart. Then gravity takes over. Mud, stones, sand, and gold-bearing material flow downward through channels and sluices designed to capture the valuable heavy particles. You hear the operation before approaching closely. Water roars against earth with a force unlike the gentle river sounds of your first season. Gravel tumbles through muddy torrents. Timber creaks, and workers shout to make themselves heard. The hillside appears wounded. Where vegetation once covered the slope, exposed earth now rises in strange walls and channels. Brown water pours below the workings, carrying sediment towards streams and valleys downstream. The productivity can be extraordinary. Instead of moving gravel by individual shovel loads, hydraulic operations can process vast quantities of material. Deposits once considered too deep or extensive for ordinary placer techniques suddenly become economically attractive. But scale requires money. Companies must secure water rights, construct ditches, acquire equipment, organize labor, and maintain systems across rugged landscapes. Ownership therefore begins shifting away from the purely individual model celebrated during the earliest rush. You face a different choice now. You can continue searching for your own uncertain claim, or you can work for an enterprise where another person controls the equipment and bears much of the financial risk. Wages feel less romantic. They can also buy supper. Historical research based on mining records, engineering reports, newspapers, and surviving landscapes has documented this movement toward capital-intensive extraction. Scholars at Stanford and the University of California have examined how mining technology reshaped both Western labor and the environment. The mainstream pattern is unmistakable. As easily accessible placer deposits decline, successful extraction increasingly depends upon organized investment and technology. The independent prospector remains important, especially in new districts, but established fields favor large operations. Underground mining develops alongside these changes. Gold can occur within hard rock, particularly quartz veins that require miners to follow deposits beneath the surface. This work differs sharply from washing loose river gravel. You enter a tunnel cautiously. Daylight narrows behind you while the air becomes cooler and heavier. Water drips somewhere beyond the reach of your lamp, and cold iron tools feel smooth beneath your fingers. The earth surrounds you completely. Miners drill, blast, break rock, remove waste, support openings with timber, and transport valuable ore toward the surface. Processing that ore requires additional machinery to crush rock and separate gold. Every stage adds expense. Every stage adds danger. Underground workings face unstable rock, poor ventilation, water intrusion, equipment accidents, and the constant physical strain of labor in confined spaces. A timber support suddenly looks precious. You place your palm against one upright and feel moisture in the wood. Above it rests a weight you cannot see and prefer not to calculate. Mining becomes specialized. Some workers understand blasting. Others handle timbering, hauling, pumping machinery, or ore processing. The person called a miner may now perform one role within a complex production system. Your relationship with gold changes accordingly. You might spend an entire shift underground without seeing anything that resembles a bright nugget. Instead, you remove dull rock whose value can only be determined after processing. The romance becomes geological. So does the uncertainty. A company may invest heavily in tunnels following a promising vein only to discover that the deposit narrows or disappears. Engineers and experienced miners can interpret geological signs, but the underground landscape keeps its secrets remarkably well. Historians still debate how quickly industrialization displaced older forms of mining across different Western districts. Researchers at Harvard, Yale, and the University of Chicago have emphasized different combinations of technology, capital, labor markets, law, and environmental conditions. Change is uneven. A lone prospector may still pan beside a distant creek while a major company operates machinery elsewhere. The two worlds overlap for decades, yet the direction becomes difficult to miss. Hydraulic mining also creates consequences beyond the mine itself. Enormous volumes of sediment move downstream. filling channels and contributing to flooding problems affecting agricultural lands in California's valleys. Farmers begin resisting. Their fields and communities bear costs created far upstream, while mining companies argue for an industry central to regional prosperity. The dispute reaches the courts. In 1884, the famous federal decision associated with Woodruff against North Bloomfield Gravel Mining Company restricts major hydraulic mining practices that discharge damaging debris into waterways. The ruling becomes a landmark. It does not end every form of hydraulic mining immediately, but it severely limits the great operations that had transformed parts of California. The conflict reveals a changing West. Mining can no longer claim unquestioned priority simply because it produces gold. Farmers, towns, governments, courts, and other economic interests now compete over water, land, rivers, and environmental damage. You stand beside an abandoned hydraulic cut years later. Rainwater trickles through channels carved by machinery and pressure. The exposed earth looks almost architectural, shaped into cliffs that nature did not design. Your boots crunch across loose stones. You remember kneeling beside the river with a pan, searching patiently through one small load of gravel. The difference feels enormous. But technology has not killed the dream. It has pushed the dream outward. When established districts become expensive, crowded, or dominated by companies, restless prospectors begin listening again for rumors from beyond California. A strike elsewhere can reset the game. New territory means untested streams, uncertain claims, temporary camps, and perhaps another chance to arrive before machinery and capital follow. The old excitement returns. News travels through saloons, newspapers, freight routes, and mining camps. Someone has found color beyond the familiar fields. Tools are packed. Horses are prepared. Men who swore they were finished with prospecting suddenly remember that one more journey cannot possibly hurt. The frontier moves with them. And across the wider West, the cycle begins again. The rumor beyond California refuses to remain a rumor for long. You have seen this pattern before, and still your pulse changes when someone unfolds a newspaper beside the stove and points toward another reported discovery. There is gold elsewhere. The sentence feels almost dangerous. By the late 1850s, California no longer possesses the entire Western imagination. Prospectors begin moving through a much larger mineral frontier, following reports into territories where mountains, rivers, deserts, and isolated valleys promise another beginning. Your tools are worn now. The shovel handle carries repairs. Your boots have been replaced more than once, and experience has taught you to distrust any man promising easy wealth. Still you pack. Gold rushes have their own rhythm. A discovery becomes a whisper. The whisper becomes a report, and the report becomes a migration before anyone knows whether the ground can support the arriving crowd. You follow that rhythm northward. In 1858, discoveries along the Fraser River in British Columbia attract thousands of prospectors, including many who leave California hoping to repeat the early days of 1849. Quickly, ships fill with passengers, equipment, provisions, and expectations. Merchants understand the pattern immediately, because every new rush creates customers before it creates successful miners. You travel among restless veterans. Some men have already spent nearly a decade moving between claims. Their faces are older, their confidence quieter, but their conversations still return to the possibility of untouched ground. Sea wind cuts through your coat. Wet rope smells sharply aboard the crowded vessel, while gulls circle above a harbour disappearing behind you. Someone nearby protects his mining tools as carefully as another traveller guards his money. The Fraser excitement proves difficult. High water, challenging terrain, limited access, and competition complicate the rush. Indigenous communities already occupy and use the region, creating another frontier where incoming miners bring pressure and conflict. Not every traveller stays. Some return south disappointed. Others keep searching. That movement matters because prospectors carry knowledge from one rush into the next. They know how to test gravel, organize claims, build sluices, judge rumors and create settlements with astonishing speed. They also carry old prejudices and rivalries. The frontier moves geographically, but human habits travel comfortably. Historical research across Western archives, including collections studied by scholars at Stanford and the University of California, confirms how mobile mining populations became during these decades. California served not merely as one destination, but as a training ground for later mineral rushes across Western North America. You become part of that circulation. News from Colorado soon pulls attention toward the Rocky Mountains. Gold discoveries associated with the late 1850s encourage a major migration into the region during 1809. The familiar excitement returns immediately. People paint hopeful slogans on wagons and head toward distant mountains with confidence that would be charming if mountains respected confidence. The plains stretch endlessly. Summer heat settles over the trail. Dust enters your mouth, and distant storms darken the horizon long before rain reaches your camp. Then the Rockies rise ahead. Mining around places such as Clear Creek and Central City helps establish Colorado as an important mineral region. Early placer discoveries attract prospectors, while hard rock mining becomes increasingly significant as surface deposits prove limited. You recognize the transition, first compans and simple washing methods, then tunnels, mills, machinery, investors, and organized companies appear wherever geology rewards deeper extraction. The cycle feels almost rehearsed. A rough camp develops beside promising ground. Stores appear, drinking establishments open, property values rise, newspapers announce discoveries with tremendous confidence. Then reality arrives. Some claims perform well, others produce little. A miner who reached the district expecting immediate wealth may spend weeks discovering that the richest ground was claimed before he finished unpacking. You have learned not to laugh. You once believed similar things. The emotional pattern of each rush is remarkably consistent. Hope expands during the journey, uncertainty grows after arrival, and disappointment becomes easier to endure when another rumor appears beyond the mountains. That rumor might lead toward Idaho. Gold discoveries during the early 1860s attract miners into districts around the Clearwater region and later the Boise Basin. Settlements rise rapidly as prospectors enter country demanding difficult travel and expensive supply systems. Cold nights arrive quickly at elevation. You work beneath canvas while frozen fingers struggle with bootlaces. Horse breath hangs white in the morning air, and yesterday's damp clothing has become unpleasantly stiff. Nobody feels wealthy for breakfast. Farther north, Montana becomes another major destination. Gold discoveries at places including Bannack in 1862 and Virginia City after the Alder Gulch strike in 1863 produced new waves of migration. Once again, towns appear almost instantly. A gulch that recently held scattered activity becomes crowded with miners, merchants, freighters, builders, and people offering every service that a concentrated population can purchase. The numbers can be deceptive. Thousands may enter a district because gold exists there, but that does not mean thousands become rich. Mainstream economic histories of Western mining consistently emphasize this distinction. Gold rushes redistribute people and capital on a scale far larger than the number of individual fortunes they create. Harvard and Yale historians have examined Western migration within the wider development of American markets and settlement. Their work reinforces how mineral discoveries stimulated transportation, commerce, urban growth, and territorial development far beyond the value found in one miner's pan. The rush builds more than mines. It builds roads, freight routes, connect remote districts to supply centers. Agricultural communities gain customers. Merchants expand networks, while governments face pressure to establish institutions across rapidly growing settlements. Mining helps reorganize the map, yet historians still debate how much mineral rushes independently drove Western settlement compared with federal policy. Transportation improvements, military expansion, agriculture, and wider population growth. The forces overlap too deeply for a simple answer. You experience them together. A road that carries your mining equipment may also carry settlers, soldiers, mail, livestock, and government officials. A town built around gold may later survive through ranching, transport, commerce, or administration. Others disappear. You encounter abandoned camps during your travels. A collapsed roof leans into weeds. Broken boards surround a silent fireplace, while rusted metal lies near ground once argued over with astonishing passion. The silence feels strange. Someone believed this place would become permanent. Someone probably wrote home describing its future. Now wind moves through empty structures. Such places remind you that every boom contains the possibility of abandonment. A deposit weakens, another strike becomes fashionable, and the population follows opportunity elsewhere. By the 1860s and 1870s, prospectors continue moving into Arizona, the Black Hills, and numerous smaller districts. Silver joins gold as a powerful attraction, while copper and other minerals increasingly shape Western development. The miner becomes more mobile than ever. You learn to judge towns by their age. Fresh camps smell of cut timber and optimism. Established towns smell of stables, coal smoke, kitchens, workshops, and accumulated human life. Declining camps feel different. Windows darken earlier. Stores carry fewer supplies. Conversations begin with the name of some distant place where the ground is supposedly richer. Then one evening, another name dominates the room: Nevada. You have heard of its mineral wealth before, but the scale of what developed there represents something beyond the familiar placer rush. The Comstock has changed mining. Deep shafts, powerful machinery, dangerous underground work, corporate finance, and enormous mineral production point toward a future where the miner increasingly works inside systems larger than himself. Your pan remains in your belongings, but the next world waits underground. Nevada does not greet you with the gentle green riverbanks that shaped your earliest memories of California. The country feels harsher here, with dry slopes, sharp light, dusty roads, and mountains that seem to reveal every fold beneath the open sky. Yet beneath those mountains lies extraordinary wealth. The Comstock Lode, discovered in 1859, becomes one of the most important mineral discoveries in Western history. Gold is present, but silver soon gives the district its defining reputation and transforms mining on an enormous scale. You arrive near Virginia City after climbing through dry country. Wagon wheels grind over rough roads. Dust settles into your coat, while freight animals breathe heavily beneath loads of machinery, timber, food, tools, and supplies. Then the town appears. Virginia City rises along steep terrain with an energy familiar from earlier boomtowns, yet something feels different. Buildings crowd the slopes, businesses multiply, and mining companies dominate conversations in ways that simple placer claims rarely did. This is no lonely creek. The richest deposits lie underground. You follow workers toward a mine entrance where machinery replaces the quiet patience of your old pan. Cables, hoisting systems, pumps, timber, engines, and organized crews allow people to descend far beneath the surface. The first descent unsettles you. Daylight shrinks above as the cage carries you downward. Cold air brushes your face at first, but deeper workings can become dangerously warm because underground temperatures rise with depth. Your lamp throws narrow shadows across timber. The smell of damp rock, sweat, oil, and wood fills the confined space. Somewhere below, metal strikes stone with a dull rhythm that seems to travel through the mountain itself. Then you step out. The tunnel is narrower than your imagination prefers. Timber supports surround passages driven through unstable ground, and every beam suddenly appears important enough to deserve your personal gratitude. Mining the Comstock requires innovation. The geology creates serious engineering challenges, including weak ground that can collapse as miners remove ore. Philip Diedesheimer develops the square-set timbering system during the early Comstock years. The method uses interlocking timber frames. These structures create three-dimensional support systems that can be extended as mining progresses through difficult ore bodies. Empty spaces may be filled with waste rock, helping stabilize areas where ordinary supports prove inadequate. You look upward at the timber framework. There is an entire forest underground. Wood becomes one of the invisible foundations of deep mining, cut elsewhere, transported to the district, shaped by workers, and placed beneath mountains so other workers can continue extracting ore. The system requires coordination. Miners drill into rock, prepare blasting operations, clear broken material, maintain supports, operate hoists, manage ventilation, and control water entering deeper workings. Nobody controls the entire process alone. Research based on Comstock records and Western mining archives, including material studied by historians at Stanford and the University of California, shows how strongly this era accelerated the shift toward corporate mining. The reason is practical. Deep mines are expensive. A prospector can purchase a pan and tester stream with limited resources. He cannot casually finance a deep shaft. Steam machinery, pumps, processing mills, timber system, transportation, and hundreds of workers. Capital becomes essential. Investors purchase shares in mining companies, and speculation follows mineral discoveries almost as eagerly as prospectors once followed rumors across mountain trails. The mining frontier meets finance. San Francisco becomes deeply connected to Comstock wealth. Mining stocks attract investors, while banks, brokers, merchants, manufacturers, and transport businesses participate in an economic network extending far beyond Nevada. You might work underground while someone hundreds of miles away studies the value of shares connected to your mine. That relationship feels strange. The rock remains physical. Your muscles ache after lifting equipment. Your shirt sticks to your back, and dust settles inside your mouth. Yet decisions affecting your employment may be made by people who never enter a shaft. The miner becomes a wage worker. Regular wages can offer stability compared with uncertain prospecting, but employment depends upon company decisions, ore quality, investment, machinery, and market conditions. Your fortune is no longer entirely yours to chase. Your risk remains personal. Underground accidents are a constant danger. Rock falls, equipment failures, blasting incidents, fires, and flooding can turn routine work into emergency with little warning. The Comstock also struggles with heat as shafts descend. Temperatures become increasingly difficult. Ventilation systems and engineering improvements become necessary simply to make deeper work possible. You feel the warmth gathering underground. Sweat runs beneath your clothing despite the darkness. Air seems heavier, and the memory of cold California streams suddenly feels almost luxurious. You would gladly complain about frozen fingers again. Almost! Mining companies also need powerful mills to process ore after it reaches the surface. Crushing and treatment methods separate valuable metals from enormous quantities of ordinary rock. The mountain is becoming an industrial system. Ore rises through shafts, moves toward mills, undergoes processing, and enters commercial networks connecting Nevada to national and international markets. Historical records confirm the enormous economic importance of the Comstock. Its production helps create major fortunes and supports Western financial development. It also demonstrates that mineral wealth does not necessarily enrich the workers performing the most physically dangerous tasks. That distinction interests modern historians. Scholars at Harvard, Yale, and the University of Chicago have examined Western mining through labor history, business development, technological change, and inequality. Historians still debate how revolutionary the Comstock should be considered within the broader industrialization of the West. Some emphasize technological innovation and corporate organization, while others stress continuity with the development already underway in California. You do not need to settle the argument. You can hear the difference. Steam machinery works above you. Hoisting equipment moves loads through shafts. Timber crews maintain underground structures, While mills process ore with relentless mechanical rhythm, the sound never resembles panning. Virginia City reflects that scale above ground. Hotels, theatres, newspapers, shops, saloons, homes, churches, and public buildings serve a population connected to mining but increasingly urban in its habits. Families establish lives here. Workers rent rooms. Merchants build businesses intended to survive longer than a temporary camp. Entertainment becomes elaborate enough to remind you that Western mining towns are not isolated from wider American culture, yet prosperity remains unstable. Ore bodies change, companies rise and fall, stock speculation creates winners and losers who may never touch mining tools. Rumors still matter, they simply travel through financial markets now. You finish a shift and emerge toward evening light. The sky feels enormous after hours underground. Dry air touches your face and you stand quietly while your eyes adjust to the western sunset. Around you, workers walk home. One man rubs dust from his hands before entering a house where children wait. Another sits outside a boarding place, too tired to remove his boots immediately. These are intimate moments inside industrial history. The heroic prospector has not vanished, but he now shares the West with engineers, wage miners, investors, mechanics, mill workers, and managers. Then transportation begins tightening those connections. Rails push farther across the continent. Telegraph wires carry information with astonishing speed. Freight moves more efficiently between cities and mining districts. Isolation begins shrinking. The frontier that once required months of dangerous travel becomes increasingly connected to national markets, distant capital, and expanding settlement. And as the rails approach, the mining West enters another age. The evening sky above Nevada remains enormous, but the distances beneath it are beginning to shrink. Tracks now stretch across country that once demanded months of wagon travel. While telegraph wires carry information faster than any horse could dream of moving, you have lived long enough to feel the difference. In 1849, reaching California meant surrendering yourself to oceans, plains, deserts, mountains, weather, and uncertainty. Now steel rails increasingly connect the mining West with cities, factories, farms, ports, and financial markets far beyond the horizon. The transformation becomes unmistakable in 1869. That year, the first transcontinental railroad is completed when the Central Pacific and Union Pacific systems meet at Promontory Summit in Utah Territory. The achievement does not instantly place tracks beside every mine. Still, the continent has changed. Research by historians at Stanford and the University of California has examined how railroads accelerated Western economic integration. Mining districts become increasingly connected to national markets through transportation systems carrying people, machinery, food, timber, ore, and investment. You experience that change through ordinary objects. A replacement tool once depended upon a freight wagon crawling over difficult roads. Machinery could require enormous effort to transport into remote mountain districts. Railroads reduce that isolation. Heavy equipment can travel farther and more reliably, encouraging mining operations whose scale would have been difficult during the earliest rush. The rails carry workers too. You stand on a station platform while steam drifts across your coat. The locomotive breathes loudly beside you, metal warm beneath the afternoon sun. Passengers step down carrying bags and tools. Some look impossibly clean. You remember arriving in California after months of travel with dust embedded into every piece of clothing you owned. These newcomers complain about an uncomfortable train seat. Progress has its little insults. Yet the railroad changes more than convenience. Mining companies can move machinery and supplies more efficiently, while ore from certain districts can reach processing centers or markets at lower transportation costs. Remote deposits become more economically practical. Towns near rail connections gain advantages over settlements bypassed by the tracks. A station can redirect commerce almost as dramatically as a mineral discovery once redirected prospectors. You see streets reorganize around access. Warehouses rise beside tracks. Freight platforms fill with barrels, timber, crates, sacks, machinery, and equipment waiting for onward transport. Eden. The smell is coal smoke and hot iron. A locomotive whistle rolls across the valley, echoing against hills where miners still follow veins through ancient rock. Then comes the telegraph, long before rail connections reach every district. Telegraph lines transform the speed at which information can travel. News that once required weeks can cross enormous distances with astonishing rapidity. For mining, speed matters. Companies need information about markets, equipment, investment, labor, and transportation. Investors want reports from distant operations, while newspapers spread discoveries before old-fashioned rumors of finished crossing the nearest saloon. The gold rush becomes electrically impatient. A strike reported in one territory can influence movement elsewhere. Prices and financial news travel quickly enough to connect Western mines more tightly with Eastern business centers. Paper maps begin feeling smaller. The mining frontier is still physically demanding, but economically it is becoming part of a continental system. Historical scholarship at Harvard and the University of Chicago has explored railroads as powerful institutions shaping 19th century American markets. Their importance to Western development extends far beyond passenger travel. Railroads consume resources themselves. They require timber, iron, coal, land, labor, workshops, water, and maintenance. Towns grow around junctions and depots, while businesses develop to serve transportation networks. Mining and railroads reinforce one another. Mines provide freight. Railroads provide access. The relationship can determine whether a district expands or struggles. A rich deposit located near reliable transportation may attract investment more easily than comparable ground isolated behind difficult mountain routes. Capital notices geography. So do workers. You no longer need to carry your entire future on a wagon. A train can move you between established Western centers with a speed that would have seemed absurd during your first journey. Still, the final miles remain difficult. Many mining districts lie far from major tracks, requiring stagecoaches, wagons, pack animals, narrow roads, and determined legs. You leave the train one morning and climb onto a freight wagon. Rain has softened the road. Mud collects around the wheels. Horses strain against their harnesses, and your supposedly modern journey slows to the familiar pace of 19th century inconvenience. The frontier has not disappeared, it has become uneven. Railroads also encourage larger permanent settlements. Reliable transportation allows towns to receive manufactured goods, building materials, newspapers, food, clothing, and household items more regularly. Mining families gain access to wider markets. A home in a mature Western town may contain furniture and manufactured objects that would have seemed absurdly luxurious inside an 1849 tent. You enter one such house after work. A lamp glows beside the table. Curtains hang over glass windows, and a child reads from a school book while supper warms nearby. Your wet coat hangs beside the door. For a moment, the distance from the old camp feels greater than the distance from California to the east. The mining frontier has created communities, schools, newspapers, churches, courts, banks, theatres, hotels, workshops, and local governments make established mining towns increasingly complex. But connection also strengthens corporate control. Large companies can draw upon distant investors, purchase sophisticated machinery, recruit specialized workers, and transport output efficiently. The lone miner faces formidable competition. A pan, shovel, and strong back remain useful for prospecting, but they cannot easily challenge companies capable of financing deep shafts, mills, pumps, hoists, and extensive transportation systems. Your independence becomes conditional. Perhaps you work for wages now. The company whistle determines when your shift begins. A supervisor assigns work, and your pay depends upon hours rather than the amount of gold personally passing through your hands. There is comfort in predictability. There is also loss. You remember mornings beside a river when every decision belonged to you. The claim might fail completely, but the possibility of success felt personal. Now the mine has offices. Someone keeps payroll records. Someone calculates costs. Someone studies ore production and decides whether a level remains profitable enough to continue. The West has discovered management. Historians still debate whether transportation should be viewed mainly as a force-opening economic opportunity or as a mechanism concentrating corporate power and accelerating dispossession. Scholars at Yale, Stanford, and Princeton have approached railroad expansion through economic, political, environmental, and social evidence. Both consequences appear before you. Farmers gain markets. Businesses gain customers. Mining companies gain machinery. Settlers gain faster transportation. Indigenous communities face further intrusion as transportation corridors strengthen settler expansion across Western lands. Connection has costs. The physical landscape changes as well. Rail grades cut across valleys, bridges span waterways, telegraph poles march beside tracks, while smoke from locomotives drifts across country once crossed mainly by trails. You stand near the rails at dusk. Cold iron shines beneath fading light. Far down the track, a locomotive approaches, its distant rhythm growing stronger through the ground beneath your boots. It passes with astonishing force. Then silence returns. You look toward the mountains and realize the old mining frontier is already becoming memory. Even while miners continue working throughout the West, stories begin changing faster than reality. Newspapers celebrate rugged prospectors. Writers turn boomtowns into stages for adventure. Former miners remember difficult years through the softer light of distance. Mud becomes romance. Exhaustion becomes courage. Failure disappears behind the glitter of the rare successful strike. And gradually, the working miner becomes something larger than a worker. He becomes a legend. The locomotive disappears beyond the hills, but the story it leaves behind travels farther than the sound. By the 1870s and 1880s, the mining West is no longer merely a distant workplace. It is becoming an imagined landscape consumed by readers who may never smell wet leather, crushed rock, or wood smoke. You discover this transformation almost accidentally. A newspaper reaches town, carrying a dramatic account of prospectors somewhere beyond the mountains. The men in the article seem fearless, independent, endlessly determined, and remarkably untouched by sawbacks or unpaid bills. You smile at that. Apparently, mud photographs poorly in memory. The actual miner has always lived inside contradiction. You chase independence while depending upon merchants, transport workers, partners, laws, water systems, and eventually corporations. You seek wealth but often earn wages. You travel toward freedom and discover boundaries marked by claims. Taxation, prejudice, geography, and economic necessity. Popular storytelling smooths those contradictions. Newspapers had helped spread gold fever from the beginning. Reports of discoveries could attract migrants, stimulate commerce, and transform unknown locations into famous destinations almost overnight. Now those same cultural forces reshape memory. Readers encounter Western stories filled with sudden discoveries. Dangerous journeys, eccentric characters, lost mines, spectacular fortunes, and rough settlements standing beyond comfortable civilization. The ordinary disappears first. Nobody writes heroic paragraphs about washing socks after 12 hours beside a river. Few legends pause while the protagonist calculates whether his remaining gold can purchase flour and replace a broken shovel. Reality has poor timing, yet popular fascination has historical roots. California's rush genuinely involved extraordinary migration, rapid settlement, dramatic economic change, and remarkable individual experiences. Later rushes carried that pattern through much of the West. The raw material for legend already exists. Writers simply select the brightest pieces. Archival collections, studied by historians at institutions such as Stanford and the University of California, reveal a far broader experience through letters, diaries, newspapers, business records, and government documents. Those sources restore ordinary people. They show miners complaining about prices, illness, weather, partners, claims, and loneliness. They record merchants discussing shipments, families building homes, and workers negotiating lives within unstable economies. That evidence rarely destroys the legend entirely. Instead, it makes the legend human. I'll begin hearing old miners tell stories differently too. Memory has its own mining process. Years remove details, leaving certain moments brighter than others. The freezing mornings fade slightly, while the day someone found a large nugget remains perfectly clear. Perhaps you do this yourself. You remember your first flake of real gold more vividly than hundreds of empty pans. You remember arriving at camp beneath the evening smoke, but not every miserable breakfast that followed. Time edits carefully. Memoirs and reminiscences become increasingly important as participants describe the early rush from later decades. Such accounts can provide valuable evidence, but historians must compare them with records created closer to the events. People forget. They exaggerate. They combine separate incidents or interpret youth through the experience of age. A story repeated for 20 years can become polished until uncertainty disappears. Debate how much later frontier mythology reflects lived experience and how much it reflects the cultural needs of later Americans. Scholars at Yale, Harvard, and Princeton have examined Western memory through literature, politics, entertainment, and national identity. The debate remains useful because legends perform work. The miner becomes a symbol of individualism. He appears as someone willing to abandon security, cross enormous distances, endure hardship, and gamble everything upon personal effort. That image fits powerful American ideas about self-reliance. It also hides dependence. Remember the freight wagons, the boarding houses, the Chinese mining crews, the cooks, the blacksmiths, the railroad workers, and the families building communities around extraction. Remember indigenous lands transformed beneath the rush. The solitary prospector never truly stands alone. Still, entertainment prefers a clear silhouette. Popular fiction increasingly uses Western settings, while stage performances and traveling entertainment help turn frontier characters into recognizable types. The mining camp becomes theatrical. There is the lucky prospector, the hardened veteran, the dishonest gambler, the respectable newcomer, and the mysterious stranger who probably knows where gold is hidden. Real camps contained more accountants. They rarely receive starring roles. Photography also shapes memory. Images of mining towns, workers, machinery, landscapes, and settlements provide valuable visual records. Yet photographs capture selected moments rather than entire experiences. A miner standing proudly beside equipment looks permanent. The photograph cannot easily show his uncertainty about next month's wages, nor can it reproduce smell. You remember that clearly. Mining had the smell of wet earth, sweat, smoke, animals, timber, oil, food, and clothing worn too many days between proper washings. Legend smells considerably better. By the 1880s, the United States itself is changing rapidly. Industrial cities expand. Corporations grow, connect regions, and wage labor becomes central to millions of lives. Against that world, the old prospector seems appealing. He appears to belong to an earlier age when one person could enter the wilderness with tools and discover wealth through courage and persistence. The image grows stronger as the reality weakens. Industrial mining now requires machinery, engineers, investors, specialized labor, and organized companies. The lone prospector may discover a deposit, but developing it often demands resources beyond his reach. The hero survives precisely because his world is disappearing. You understand this one evening while sitting inside an established mining town. Electric lighting has begun appearing in some Western mining communities during the later 19th century. New technologies join telegraph systems, rail connections, steam machinery, and increasingly sophisticated industrial operations. Outside, a young man asks about 1849. "I has heard you were there." His expression changes when you describe the journey. So you tell him about the cold river and your first gold pan. He listens closely. You mention the leaking tent. He laughs. You describe food prices, cracked hands, disappointing claims, and miners leaving poorer than they arrived. He listens differently now. Then he asks whether you ever found a fortune. You look at your hands. The answer depends upon what fortune means. Perhaps you never became wealthy. Perhaps your greatest success was surviving long enough to watch California become a state and Western mining become an industry. You crossed landscapes that rail passengers now traverse in days. You watched canvas camps become towns. You saw streams crowded with pans, hillsides torn apart by hydraulic water, and shafts descend into mountains beneath forests of supporting timber. Your life contains history, but history is preparing to remember something simpler. The bearded miner with a pan becomes an icon. His worn hat, rough clothing, mule, pick, and hopeful expression become visual shorthand for the gold rush. That do many people who sustained the mining world. You hear distant music from a crowded hall while night settles over the town. Horse hooves strike the road, and lamplight falls across windows filled with manufactured goods brought through national transportation networks. This is no temporary camp. The West around you has matured. By 1890, the federal census famously reports that a clear frontier line can no longer be identified in the way it once had been. Settlement has spread across regions once described by the Americans as frontier country. Mining continues vigorously. New discoveries will come after 1895, and prospectors will continue searching far beyond the period of your story. Yet the old gold miner belongs increasingly to memory. You carry the pan that began your journey and turn it beneath the light. Its surface is scratched from use, ordinary and almost worthless. No museum has requested it. No newspaper cares, but you remember what it meant when the continent seemed larger, when California seemed impossibly distant, and when one bright fragment could persuade thousands to abandon everything familiar. Now another century approaches. The mining camps are changing, the companies are growing, and many old boomtowns are already silent. You are approaching the twilight of the world that made you. The scratched pan rests across your knees as the final years of the 19th century gather around you. It once seemed like a key to unlimited possibility. By 1895, it feels more like a small piece of evidence from a vanished world. Mining has not ended. Far from it. Across the West, men still prospect through mountain ranges, deserts, river valleys, and remote districts where rumors continue drawing hopeful travelers. Gold remains valuable, and discoveries can still create excitement. But the world around the prospector has changed. You see that transformation whenever you approach a major mine. Tall structures rise above shafts, machinery works through long shifts, and organized crews descend beneath ground according to schedules. Capital controls much of the scale. Companies can finance pumps, hoists, mills, explosives, timber, transportation, and specialized workers. Deep deposits demand resources that one person carrying a shovel cannot easily provide. Your old independence survives mostly at the beginning. A prospector might discover promising ground, but developing a major deposit increasingly requires investors and technical knowledge. The discovery can still begin with one person, while the mine that follows becomes an industrial enterprise. Historical records studied by scholars at Stanford and the University of California trace this long transition from early placer mining toward increasingly mechanized extraction. It is one of the central developments in Western mining history. You have watched nearly all of it. In 1848, you imagined gold resting beneath shallow water near a sawmill. By the 1890s, mining involves complex systems connected to railroads, banks, manufacturers, laboratories, and distant markets. The change is almost difficult to measure. Your body measures it well enough. The fingers that once stiffened inside cold streams now carry swollen joints. Your shoulders remember years of lifting gravel. While an old injury complains whenever rain approaches, you walk more slowly. That seems reasonable. The West itself has aged beside you. Some boomtowns survive by becoming permanent communities. Mining remains important. But commerce, ranching, transport, government, agriculture, and other industries help sustain places once dependent upon nearby mineral discoveries. Other settlements disappear. You read past one abandoned camp during autumn. A muddy road, empty buildings whose roofs have begun collapsing inward. Wind moves through a doorway where miners once crowded around tables discussing claims. No music remains. The silence feels heavier because you remember the noise. A rusted stove stands inside one cabin. Broken glass catches weak sunlight near the wall, while weeds grow where boots once churned the ground into mud. Someone built a future here. Then the ore weakened. People packed what they could carry and followed opportunity elsewhere, leaving timber, iron, memories, and empty streets behind them. Historians still debate exactly how the frontier experience should fit within the larger story of American development. Scholars at Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and the University of Chicago have challenged older interpretations that treated Western expansion mainly as a heroic march of individual settlers. Modern scholarship asks wider question: who gained access to land and resources, who supplied labor, who accumulated wealth, which communities were displaced? And how did government support or regulate expansion? The answers complicate nostalgia. You cannot remember the gold rush only through successful miners. You remember indigenous communities facing devastating displacement and violence. You remember foreign miners confronting taxes and hostility, and Chinese workers building levees, despite enreadingly organized discrimination. You remember women sustaining households and businesses. You remember cooks, merchants, blacksmiths, freighters, farmers, railroad workers, and countless others whose labor allowed mining settlements to exist. The West was never one man's story. That may be the greatest correction time gives you. The legendary miner remains powerful because he represents something emotionally simple. He leaves home, enters uncertainty, works with his hands, and hopes the earth will reward courage. Real life was less obedient. Hard work did not guarantee success. Good people failed. Lucky people prospered. Some fortunes came from mining, while others came from selling goods, financing companies, transporting supplies, or purchasing promising property at the right moment. Chance never disappeared, neither did persistence. That mixture helps explain why the gold miner remains compelling long after individual camps vanish. His life sits between planning and accident, independence and dependence, hope and exhaustion. You know, both sides. One winter evening in 1895, rain settles over an old mining town. Water runs from rooftops and darkens the wooden street. Wet leather creaks as you remove your boots beside a stove, and wood smoke hangs faintly inside the room. Your hands warm slowly. Someone nearby asks about California again. You tell them that the gold looked smaller than expected. They laugh. You explain that the first flakes barely covered the bottom of a pan, yet grown men could stare at them as though the sun itself had fallen into the gravel. That memory still feels true. You do not describe yourself as a hero. You were hungry too often for that. You were cold, muddy, stubborn, hopeful, disappointed, occasionally fortunate, and frequently uncertain about what tomorrow would bring. You were human. Outside, rain continues tapping against the window. The mining West has entered another era, and new mineral discoveries will soon create rushes beyond the boundaries of this story. The old impulse will continue wherever people believe extraordinary wealth waits beyond familiar roads. But your journey from 1848 to 1895 is complete. You have followed gold from shallow California streams into hydraulic workings, underground tunnels, corporate mines, rail networks, and national mythology. The pan remains beside you. It contains nothing tonight. Still, when firelight touches its scratched surface, you remember cold water moving over gravel beneath California trees. Everything followed from that quiet moment, and perhaps the gold was never the entire story. The deeper story was movement, millions of decisions shaped by hope, fear, ambition, labor, migration, technology, prejudice, survival, and the endless human belief that life might become different somewhere beyond the horizon. You close your eyes. Rain softens against the roof. The old mining camps grow quiet at last. Word count Naituo. The story may end in 1895, but the footsteps of those miners remain across the American West. They survive in abandoned roads, altered rivers, mountain towns, family histories, and the strange power of a scratched gold pan beneath warm firelight. If you enjoyed travelling through this history tonight, leave a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you most. Was it the first discovery beside the American River, the exhausting journey west, the muddy mining camps, or the enormous industrial mines that eventually replaced the solitary prospector? I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach you, especially when listeners share their own connections to the places we visit together, and when you are ready for another quiet journey. Continue to the next history video on the channel. Another road, another century, and another forgotten world will be waiting there. Sleep well tonight, and thank you for travelling through the past.